I'm back, and we're just about ready to get started. So Professor Bill von Hippel is in the house, and we're really, really excited for this really extra special social event that we get. It's a real treat to hear from a true specialist in the field of psychology, specifically social psychology. Real treat to have him here telling us about how we interact with others and how others perceive our interactions with them. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Professor Bill von Hippel up to the stage. So come present. And just a little logistical stuff. We are doing an AMA format, which means that anybody in the audience can ask anything they want. Please put all of your questions in the global chat. So there's a little chat icon down in the bottom right corner, and we will be watching that chat for questions. And when we find a question that is super interesting, then we will ask you to come up on stage, and we'll call you one by one to ask your questions. So, Bill, if you want to hit the present button, that orange present button down at the bottom of your screen, then you can come up and the stage is yours.
It changed my name back to Courtney again. So sorry about that.
This is Bill.
I was having computer trouble this morning, and so I'm on my wife's computer, and it's adamant that that's where I should be. So fair enough. Lovely to see you all. I want this just to be a conversation and not me giving you guys some kind of spiel. But the super quick background about me is that I'm a social psychologist, and for the last maybe 15 or so years, I've also been working on evolutionary psychology, kind of looking at where we came from. And so I wrote this book recently that Antonia wanted me to talk about or from, called The Social Leap, where we look at the last 6 million years of our evolution and basically what's happened since we separated from chimpanzees and how does that help us understand ourselves better. And basically the story comes from there. So, what happened when we left the forest? How do we become the very social beings that we are today? And then how does that help us understand the way we talk to each other, the way we form relationships, the way we persuade each other, everything like that. So I'm happy to talk about any of that kind of stuff today, and also, of course, about how it manifests itself on these kinds of tech platforms. So rather than me just chatting away, though, I'd love to hear questions from you guys about what you'd like to hear about.
I have a question just to start us off and get us warmed up. So you talk a lot about social intelligence in your book, and I'm wondering what social intelligence looks like in a virtual setting and what the difference is between social intelligence in kind of a real world, real life in-person interaction and something that is virtual. And are there any pieces that virtual social interaction actually, I guess, lends to build itself upon the social intelligence that we have from socializing in person? That makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes good sense. And if I fail to answer your question, just remind me, because my mind is a bit like a sieve and it's early morning here. I'm in Australia now, despite my obvious American accent. But so, no, it's a great question. And basically what social intelligence is really two things, and we've known this since 1920s, and it's the capacity to understand other people and then the capacity to manage them. And so if you've got good social skills, you can look around at other people and you know what they're thinking and you know what they're feeling, and you can therefore understand what's going on in their mind and what their agenda is. That's the first half of the problem. And lots of people most of us are really quite good at that. Lots of people are actually way better than they think they are. And my favorite test, if you want to know how well you, sort of one of the many kinds of skills that underlies that, is if you can get on the web, and it's called Reading the Mind in the Eyes test. And basically, this test was created by Simon Baron Cohen, who is Sacha Baron Cohen, Borat, the actor, Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin. He's a professor at Cambridge, and he's interested in autism. And what he did is he created this test where all you see of somebody's face is just the region around their eyes. And then it says, what are they feeling? Now, it would seem like kind of impossible task. How could I tell what somebody's feeling just in this narrow scope of their face? But it turns out that it'll give you 4 options. You think, well, I'm kind of just guessing that one, and then you get it right. And I'm kind of just guessing that one, and then you get it right. And so you realize I'm better at perceiving people's emotions than I thought I was. I can read more information in people's eyes than I thought I could. And what it also makes you realize is we don't know this when we're interacting in person because we think, the mouth is so informative and other parts of the face are so informative. But we actually spend most of our time staring at people's eyes. And so there's a lot of information that we're gleaning that way that we don't even necessarily know we're getting.
Wow.
And then the second half of it is managing people, getting them to do what you want. Now, a big part of managing people is being manipulative and trying to get them to behave in ways that you want them to behave. But a big part of managing people is also making them feel comfortable, making them feel like they belong in that social setting, making them happy. And as human beings, we've evolved this fundamental desire to cooperate and be connected. And so good managers make everybody feel like they belong. They make everybody feel happy. And I'm sure you've been at a party or something like that, and you met somebody, and while you talked to them, it seemed like their attention was just on you, and they cared about you, and they really focused on you, and they really made you feel welcome and like you belonged. That's somebody who's really good at that particular kind of skill. Now, the complexity, of course, is turning all that into an online environment. And a good platform makes that more possible. A poor platform makes that more difficult.
I want to ask Ethan to come up and broadcast and ask his question from the chat, because I thought that it was a really interesting one.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Bill. Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming. Thank you, everybody else, for coming. So my question was, I was reading this article the other day that was basically an opinion piece that took, some notes from a bunch of different people, mainly psychologists, social psychologists, and it was about the effect that staring at your face has, throughout the day. And so there were some interesting arguments on both sides, one being primarily that, looking at yourself all the time increases exhaustion, social pressure, and, all the rest. But on the other side, it was about basically maintaining, a new self in basically a new medium or a new normal. And so, like I said, there's basically these two kind of competing arguments, and I was wondering what your thought was on that and how you think that's sort of changing, how we think of ourselves in, again, this sort of new environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my colleague Roy Baumeister argues that the self evolved as a reputation management machine. In other words, the whole reason that we even have a self as human beings is in order to manage how other people view us. And so from that perspective, when we're actively involved in social processing, we tend to be very self-aware all the time. Because, of course, the whole goal of social processing is to make sure that we ensure that other people form an impression of us that's positive and of the sort that we want them to. On the other hand, we also know that, like, for example, Csikszentmihalyi and others have argued that we get into these flow states. And when you're in a flow state, you're completely caught up in what you're actually doing, and you actually lose this sense of objective self-awareness. And so constantly seeing yourself, of course, is becoming objectively self-aware. It's become aware of who you are and drawing it outside yourself and then evaluating yourself from the outside. And so on the one hand, it's a positive thing because it helps you manage your social relationships. And in the case of, like, for example, e-socializing like we have here, you can look at yourself and go, oh, my hair's messy. In my case, it's not a problem. Or you can do those kinds of things that are handy to do. But if on the downside, you become constantly aware of yourself and the impression that you're forming. And so it becomes harder to take that deep dive into whatever it is that you're talking about. What you really want to do is lose yourself. In these flow states, that's when we're our happiest, because we're not thinking about ourselves as a self. Rather, we're just involved in the activity we're doing. And that tends to be a little bit more inescapable when you constantly see this photograph of yourself and you're brought outside of yourself and reminded of who you are and how you're coming across to others.
So next, I'd really like to call Jay up, because Jay wrote a really good question in the chat. Jay, if you would come up and ask your question, that would be great. You can do that by clicking the orange button at the bottom of your screen. There we go.
Oh, okay. It's not so hard when you know how. So I live in San Francisco, and I look at a lot of things through all the love. This is wonderful. Through the lens of like, well, what could we build? How could software or other technology help with this? And so I'm just sort of curious, like, in your studies and your knowledge, like, which kinds of problems, and I get this sense that this is like an evolving field. Like, when you look at where we are today, how could remote communication be improved through technology? Where do you still see room for improvement? And also, like, what are the things, like, technology is just not well suited to solve when we're in this way of working that we are now? And like, how do you distinguish between those things? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So one of the things that we know right now, and here's an example of a paper that just came out, I think this week, from Jay Van Bavel and his colleagues at NYU. And they're social neuroscientists. They look at how social processing connects up with processes in the brain and vice versa. We already know from prior work that when two people are in synchrony with each other, when they're chatting, that their brains actually come in synchrony with each other. If you put on these, have you seen these swim caps that have these little electrodes all over them, and you can look at the electrical signal coming off your scalp, which is really reflecting all the neuronal activity in your brain, or at least the stuff relatively near the surface. You engage in these, matter what you said. It didn't matter if I said, oh yeah, Jay and I are working great together. Jay Schmay, I don't care about him. That didn't predict anything. What mattered is whether, when we're both wearing those swim caps, our ERP signals went into synchrony with each other. And if they did, then you and I solved the puzzles together more effectively, and we were more likely to win our competition. We were better as a team. Now the problem is, how well does that get generated in an E environment? One of the problems that will always stand in the way is going to be the laggy effects that are just the quality of the connection, sort of the underlying infrastructure of the internet. And so, and I'm not very tech savvy. You can see I've already flubbed it like 2 or 3 times. And that's one kind of problem. Another kind of problem is if it's just laggy, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience where you have a conversation with somebody either on the phone or Zoom or Toucan or whatever, and if your connection's not very good, you keep interrupting each other. Now, sometimes we mean to interrupt each other. It's like, oh, I can't stand listening anymore what Jay has to say. I have to tell him why he's wrong or whatever. But often what's happening when we interrupt each other is that we're failing to accurately follow the paralinguistic cues in their voice. And so as I come to a close, there's ways that my vocal tone changes that tells you now it's your turn to talk. And when your connection's laggy, you miss those and you get them a little bit off. So all of those things stand in the way. What also stands in the way in platforms other than this one, but that this platform is obviously one of the key ones trying to solve, is that you're stuck in a certain place. And so you can't get around. You can't talk to the people you want to talk to. And that's just dead easy in person. And it's super hard to do if you're a bunch of squares on a screen. And so obviously that's one of the key things that Toucan was trying to solve, is give us this sort of geographic flexibility that we have naturally as regular old human beings. But really, in the end, what we want is the platform to do, what technology to do, is make it seem as real as possible. Now, the huge advantage that our mind is really good at turning small 2D images into 3D ones, because in actuality, even the 3D world that we actually live in is projected in 2D on the back of our eye, right? And so, objectively, your head is about 1 inch tall, and it's just sitting there completely flat. But my eye doesn't see it that way at all. My brain sees you as a 3D person who's not a micro person, right? So those aspects of technology we happen to have a real advantage of. They work naturally. And when we see pictures, our brain responds to them as if they're real. The trick is to try to find a way to get as many of the other processes to work as possible. The missing piece is touch. And so it may well be that if you could VR this and have some kind of device on your hands or something, it would then give you the last part of the connection. Because we know that when human beings touch each other, they really, if they're happy touches, they release oxytocin, they bond to each other, and that's completely missing in this kind of environment. And so maybe that's the next step. I have to admit I'm terrible at predicting the future, but that would be the kind of thing that would really work.
But what I'm hearing is the bottom line is, for these online things we're doing, just try to make it as real as possible, which of course has limitations with bandwidth and other things.
Yeah, that's right. And there's some advantages to them being a little bit not quite real. So imagine that you've got some friends who you don't know very well have invited you to a party and it's across town. And you're thinking, what are the risk factors? Oh, I'll feel like a fool. I'll get there. I won't know anybody. I'll be standing by myself by the punch bowl. You think about all those things. But then if it's an e-social, well, you say, well, I don't have to drive across town. The barriers to getting there have just reduced dramatically, And so why not just give it a try? Because I can always pop out if things don't go well. I'm not going to be stuck alone by the punch cooler and thinking, how can I slink out of this party, right? So there are advantages to E as well. The fact that it's not in person opens up some opportunities just like it closes other ones down.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'm going to step back now.
By all means.
And I'll step up. So we have a couple of kind of interconnected questions. One was from Michelle, and then the other one was from Chen Shi. So Chen Shi, if you would come up and present and ask your question, that would be great.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the discussion. My question has to do with social interaction in the remote setting, certainly in this last year. Oh, I love this. I love all the hypes and stuff. So with everybody working remotely, does it really change the way we expect friendship is formed or close connection is formed? Because I certainly have made friends with folks that I've never met before in real life in the past year. Several of them are here. So do you think that has changed the way we view friendships, and will it continue to be the same level going forward, even if we go back to normalcy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Pandemics are a funny thing because basically they're ghastly events. But human beings are stunningly innovative, and they can find a silver lining almost anywhere. And perhaps even more importantly, something like a pandemic can teach us things we didn't know about ourselves. And so, for example, businesses thought, well, we can't let our workers work remotely because they won't get anything done. And then suddenly they're in the no choice condition. They have to let people work remotely, or they can't do whatever it is they do for a living. And people turn out to be perfectly productive. And so suddenly lots of businesses that were completely unwilling to let you work at home are now delighted about the possibility because they don't have to have that expensive office downtown or whatever the case might be. Now, socializing works much the same way. When I was a kid, if you wanted to meet somebody who you didn't meet in person, you kind of put an ad in the newspaper that had like 2 or 3 lines in it, and what could you possibly know about somebody? And so this was a way that some people tried to meet romantic partners. There was a way some people tried to meet friends to travel with, etc. But first, I never tried it, but from all any of us could tell, it didn't work well at all. And once the internet started to get going, and it gave us these opportunities to socialize at a distance, all sorts of people started meeting friends and partners online. Now, the friend data, we don't know as much about it because it's not. Friends are a little harder to work with as scientists, because how do I decide when somebody is my better friend or my worser friend, or if I'm still friends with them? I'm still romantic partners are easy to work with because I can tell. I've got good objective indicators if you guys are still together and if you're still happy together. And my old friend John Cacioppo was a wonderful social psychologist who was one of the first to show that once the internet really got going, a lot of our romantic relationships started to get initiated online. But even more interestingly and importantly, the ones that got initiated online had a better chance of success. And so they looked at all the different places that people could meet each other, at a church gathering, at the gym, at a bar, randomly in a supermarket, and all those different places. The one that came out at the top or tied for the top almost every time was meeting online.
Wow.
We don't know exactly what it is about meeting online that works so well, but one of the things that probably matters about it is that suddenly in an online world, the whole world is available to you. We just heard from Jay in San Francisco. I'm not sure where you live, but imagine that that you have a particular personality where you're really simpatico with 1 out of 30 people. Well, in your hometown, that means only 1 out of 30 who live kind of near you are likely to be good friends. But when the whole world's your oyster, suddenly there's all sorts of humans who you could find, who you could really connect to. And so the pandemic forces us to do that, right? No, it's no longer the case that we can just go through our usual socializing activities. So we think, well, I don't like e-socializing, I don't want to do that. And now we, like the companies, are in the no choice condition. And still we start to say, well, all right, well, let me get on that platform and see who I meet. And lo and behold, it turns out it works a whole lot better than you might have thought. And you meet all sorts of wonderful people who you wouldn't have met otherwise, who you can really connect to. So I see that as a real silver lining coming out of this.
And you see it will sustain going forward, perhaps.
In all probability, so in my own case, for example, I've learned that I like to stay home more than I thought I did. I still like to go to work on occasion. I live 15 minutes in the office, but I like to work at home a lot more than I thought I did. Well, there's going to be lots of people that you meet online who probably will drift away when you have more opportunity to socialize. But there's also going to be lots of people you meet online who won't necessarily drift away, and who you might even actually go out of your way to see in person when you're next in San Francisco. You give Jay a call or something like that. So I envision it. I think all these things are going to stay. They're just going to, again, they'll recalibrate themselves.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Our next question is from Stella. So Stella, if you would click the orange present button and come up and ask your question, that would be great.
Hello. Hi, Bill. Good. Oh,
Isn't it great?
amazing. So my question is around social media. My initial question was whether you watched The Social Dilemma, and that depends on what your opinions are on social media and how technology is affecting people's perceptions of themselves and of others, especially based on likes and trends that we assume are cool, you know, in terms of what people should or should not do. So I really just want to hear what you think about how it is now and what could be done. You get my point? Yeah.
Now, that's a great question. I haven't seen The Social Dilemma, but I presume what you're talking about is the sort of Facebooky world where you put up a photo and you get a lot of likes and you're happy, you don't get a lot of likes and you take it down in humiliation and try again, sort of thing. And the downside of that kind of environment is it brings us back to the worst aspects of high school, where we all feel insecure all the time, where your sense of identity is really developing at that point, and so you're very sensitive to what other people think of you. There's the neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University has shown this amazing data whereby when you go through adolescence, the part of yourself that's engaged in self-reflection and engaged in self-presentation is hyperactive all the time. And the parts of yourself that are the self-control parts are actually a little bit in high school. It's sort of like standing, imagine that you're forced to stand as a mannequin in a storefront and everybody's staring at you all the time, but you're not able to present yourself the way you want to. You're in some ridiculous outfit that, you know, that the store chose for you or something like that. And so you feel super self-conscious, right? So Facebook, unfortunately, brings out a lot of that. And some of the ways that it does that is because those images that you put up are so heavily curated. And so when you have your best dinner or you've got your perfect hair day or whatever it is, then you take the picture and you put it up. And so it makes you look like everything is wonderful in your life. Now, of course, you, the person who put it up, knows full well that that was this great day. But to the rest of the world, it gives a false impression that that's your regular day. And so what it starts to happen is that everybody else starts to feel like, why is everyone else's life better than my own? Why do they get better vacations and better meals and their dog is cuter and their partner seems more loving and all those kinds of things, right? And we can't help it. We're social comparison machines. What we do all the time, remember I mentioned earlier that the self evolved in order to manage our reputation. And so in order to see how we're going, I have to look at how I'm traveling compared to how you're traveling. And if your Facebook page gets a lot more likes than mine does and it has a lot more fun-looking stuff on it, well, then I feel really bad. And so for a little while, Facebook took those likes away. I think that you could only see it maybe if you posted it yourself or some kind of change happened, and then it looks to me that it went right back. And so my guess is that they're very aware of the negative consequences of these sorts of social comparison processes, but then they found that people were a little less engaged. I mean, what these social network platforms are designed to do is make money. And so if their algorithms on YouTube push you to watch crazier and crazier conspiracy theories, and if that's where the money is, well, that's what they do. If their algorithms, if they find that I can't get you to stay on Facebook unless I make you a little bit insecure, well, then that's what they're going to do. So they're not in your best interest.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what the social dilemma was about. And my follow-up question would be regarding this piece that you talked about, engagement and ads, that essentially Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, they're all just ad companies with a component of self. So for as long as, I think there's a quote they had in the documentary, and they said, if you're not paying for something, like you are the commodity, something like that, right? So then selling of data, and people are just hooked and addicted to their phones. And so I wonder if you've thought about maybe what the future could look like, if we should actually lobby and, fight against this kind of technology? And I don't know, like, does that do anything to our psychology? And is it,
that's a good question, and it's a losing battle to try to fight against Facebook. But what you could easily win is when a new platform comes along that has the values that you want and creates a social space that you like, then you shift to them, because that's where it really speaks to the tech companies. Is, well, what do humans actually want? And right now, unfortunately, we're in a world where we think we're getting Facebook for free because, of course, they don't charge us for it. But by getting it for free, then you get their version of it rather than your version. And so what I suspect is going to happen is it will shift to models where you have some kind of subscription fee, but then it allows you to get the platform to be the way you want it to be. They're not busy selling you your data or trying to get you to buy stuff. On the one hand, the buying stuff, the positive side about it is at least they're good enough now that you only see ads for stuff you might want. I mean, it used to be that if I think of all the spam that came through my email, there's every single day somebody sent me an ad for some vitamins to give me a larger penis. I mean, how many of those vitamins does a human being need, right? And so at least now we're in a more sophisticated world where they can see they're eavesdropping on me, right? And so I'll mention, gee, I would really love to go to the beach, and then suddenly all this beach stuff comes up. But at least I'm now getting the beach stuff that I want, right? I'm not getting the ski vacation that I'm not interested in. So there is a positive side to all that. But I think really what we need to move toward is joining platforms that reflect the values that we want, that don't try to keep taking you down these algorithms to get you to watch crazier and crazier stuff or to get more and more likes. And if that requires you paying for it up front, that's actually, it's a false economy to not think you're paying for it, because you're paying for it in other kinds of ways.
Thank you so much. That was very detailed. I appreciate your response.
Next, Patrick, if you could come up and ask your question. Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, I don't have sound on you yet.
You should be able to hear me. Hello?
Yep.
Yeah. That works? Okay, yeah. First of all, thank you, Antonia. And Bill von Hippel. I'm in Germany, in Berlin, and you guys, what you've been doing and what you're sharing is a tremendous opportunity for all of us. For deeper understanding leads to a different path that we take, right? And my question is, what happens when we change the base interaction protocols? There's certain social interaction protocols that we use. They're slightly different in different cultures around the world. But if we would go there, to that base way of how we interact. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Listening to respond. So how you doing? Fine with you. That, with my teenage daughters, that the whole interaction. How are you? Fine with you. That's one word, I think, in America. But that's not a very socially interactive protocol, right? But if someone listens deeply to understand, that's a little bit better. But if you listen deeply only to give appreciation back to the other person, things change, right? So that's one part of the question. And the second part of the question is, under what circumstances can the digital experience surpass the physical experience? Because for me, both settings are real. I don't call one virtual and one real. I think digital is real and physical is real. There is no virtual. It's either physical or digital. So those are the two kind of questions in the arena that I wanted to pose to you. So thank you, Bill.
Of course. So let me start with your second question, and then I'll come back to the first. And by the time I get there, if I forget, please remind me. But one of the ways that the digital realm can surpass the physical realm is by allowing you to take more risks and to be more self-disclosive. So we know from earlier research that on the internet, compared to real life, that people often tend to be more disclosive on the internet because it gives them an escape hatch if things don't go well. So imagine that I'm gay and I've been struggling with coming out of the closet and I think I want to do it, but then I envision the conversation that might happen next. And it could be super duper awkward, and I want to tell you guys, and you're all my good friends, but I'm worried about what if it doesn't go well, then I'm stuck in this horrible situation. People online. So I can say to you, look, I've wanted to tell you all these years, but I should let you know that I'm gay. And then if you flip out and don't respond negatively, I know with a click of a button, I'm gone. And so it allows me to be more self-disclosive and to take a bigger social risk than I might have otherwise, because I don't have to wallow in it, so to speak, if things go pear-shaped after I take that social risk. So that's one of the positive sides about about E environments. Now, one of the consequences of that positivity, or of that particular advantage, is that the more self-disclosive people tend to be, the more close they tend to feel to each other. And so what can happen on the internet, we tend to be very self-disclosive to those who are closest in our lives. But what can happen on the internet is it can accelerate friendship development. And this comes back to a question that we saw earlier, where lots of good friends are being formed on the internet. And one way that it can accelerate friendship development is that if you're a bit more disclosive online than you would be in person, then that speeds up the process of friendship formation, because then the other person tends to reciprocate and be more disclosive, and this sort of back and forth process builds things up more quickly. Now, with regard to the first part of your question, human beings are kind of storytelling machines. We evolved to have a real affinity to stories. They help us understand the world, and they also allow us to gain the benefit of somebody else's experience without paying the hard price that experience might have cost them to gain it. And so we have a real affinity to hear stories, but also to tell them and to share the contents of our mind. So far as we know, we're the only animals on this planet who's constantly wanting to know what the other animals are thinking and constantly wants the other animals to know what they're thinking. Now, this has a huge advantage for us as individuals because it can get the group to align with us and see things our way. And it has an enormous advantage for us as groups because once the group is all on the same page, they're much more effective in achieving whatever goal they might have. The consequence of that, though, is that sometimes we're more keen to put the contents of our mind in somebody else's mind than we really are keen to hear the contents of theirs. And it depends on the social interaction, but we've all had this experience where when I'm listening to you speak, really all I'm waiting for you to do is shut up so I can tell you my story. Those are not the best friendships, best connections. In an ideal world, when I'm listening to you speak, I'm really listening to your story and then thinking about what does that mean for me and what does that mean for you and how does that reflect on our connection, and boy, I'd really love to know what happened next. And so sometimes it's hard to do that, to take that deep dive in the story that somebody else is telling you, because all you really want to do at that juncture is wait for them to stop talking so you can shove your idea into the process. Now, we as human beings evolved to want to do both, but sometimes that self-pushing goal can become ascendant, and then the connections that we form with people aren't nearly as good.
Beautiful thing. Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Patrick. Next, I'd like to call up Kathy to come and ask her question.
Hey, Bill, also known as Courtney. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's Bill on my name right there now, right there. It says Bill.
So, not on my screen, you're still Courtney. So my question actually is how technology, not only this platform, but technology in general, is going to change how our brains work and how we learn. So for instance, as you know, I've had to learn a lot of facts in my life, as have all of us on the screen. But now I don't really have to remember them anymore. As long as I know how to look it up, I can find the fact online. Another thing is I feel that physical way, and we're learning in a virtual or a digital way. Another thing that we're obviously noticing is that many of us are spending a huge amount of time on our screens. Even if we're outside and walking, we still have our screens, we're checking our emails and our social platforms. So my question is, how is this changing our brains? And I know this is all within a tiny, tiny microsecond compared to how long humans have been around, but are there any studies that have addressed this?
Yeah, there are actually. So as far as the tiny time since humans have been around, we're not looking at evolutionary changes, but as you well know, your brain is a super duper plastic device, and the way you use it is what determines how it wires itself. So perhaps my favorite example of this process is Joe Henrich's recent book. He has a book called The Weirdest People in the World, and weird for Henrich is an acronym for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. In other words, the kind of life that most of us live in the big cities of the world today. And what Henrich points out is that, let's just take one for example. Writing was invented about 5,000 years ago. And so prior to that, we learned only orally. Stories were told and we listened to them, but then suddenly you can read these stories, right? Well, reading has to repurpose some aspect of the brain because we did not evolve to read. And what the data suggests is that part of what the aspect that reading repurposes is the fusiform gyrus, which is in the temporal lobe. And the fusiform gyrus is responsible for face recognition. So if you're literate, if you can read, well, then you're using up some of your face recognition abilities. And we can literally predict how well you can do things by the size of the brain area that's dedicated to the problem. And so if I put you in a scanner...
By the way, that explains so much.
If I put you in a scanner and I look at V1, which is the area where in your occipital lobe, it's the area where your eyeballs first land and real information processing is happening visually. I can tell how well you can see by how much your brain lights up when I just flash patterns to you and I look at how big your V1 happens to be. And the bigger it is, the better visual acuity you have. Well, we're now burning up some of our fusiform gyrus in order to do this thing that we do all the time, which is read, and which our ancestors never did. So we've repurposed that area of the brain to some degree. Now, what that means is, in principle, hunter-gatherers or others who are illiterate will be better at face recognition than we are. But of course, human beings repurpose these things. This can happen throughout adulthood as well. So we know that if you've ever looked at chimpanzees in a zoo, it's pretty obvious pretty quickly that they all look exactly alike. You can't tell one of them apart from the other unless they're a different size. But if you're a chimp researcher, they start to gather their own individual qualities, and then you're using up your fusiform gyrus to be able to tell chimps apart because you start to use your own face recognition region for that as well. So we know that things get moved around as you use them. Now, as far as the second part of your question, though, well, what happens to the way we learn when information isn't really what's valuable anymore, right? Anybody, the internet is this amazing thing for democratizing information. Everybody has the entire world's knowledge at their fingertips, which is an amazing thing. But it means, well, why would I go to college? Why do I go to university? Why do I even go to high school? And I think that what that means, at least what I'm trying to do, is shift toward not teaching people facts anymore, but how to evaluate them. So, for example, one of the courses that I teach here at University of Queensland is a psychology course on methods and understanding complex problems. And all we do all semester long is we look at a graph, and I say, okay, what do these data mean? How would you interpret them? What else would you want to know to validate that interpretation, et cetera? Because I figure there's nothing I can tell you that you can't find out just as easily on your own time. But what I can try to do is help you evaluate the knowledge that you come across. Because I think that one of the biggest problems that we have, for example, in the United States today, where the world is so polarized, is that you've got people on opposite sides of the political spectrum, or any spectrum you're looking at the exact same facts, but walking away with entirely different conclusions. And in an ideal world, the more you understood about what you can infer from a set of facts, what you can't infer, what else you need to know, the better off we'd be, because in principle then, the internet would bring people together rather than driving them apart.
Great, thank you.
Of course, lovely to see you.
So I think we have time for one more question. So Benjamin, if you could press the orange present button and ask your question.
Sure. So my question is, are there any particular ideas from evolutionary psych that you think could help to design more useful or positive online communities?
That's a good question, one that I've actually never even thought about. What evolutionary psychology is good for is it tells us about our fundamental motives, and it tells us about things like why we engage in social comparison all the time and how social connection makes us happy. But one of the aspects of evolutionary psychology that's also super interesting is that it reveals disconnects between our ancestors' lives and the lives we lead today. And those disconnects can be real sources of unhappiness. And so I've not thought this through, but in answer to your question, I would say one of the disconnects that we know that exists is that social comparison process that I brought up earlier. And part of what drives that social comparison process is what we call sexual selection, or my desire for a mate to choose me. And so in principle, you and I compete because we're members of the same group to get the girls to notice us, and hopefully one of them picks me and they don't all just pick you. And so in our ancestral environment, a big part of the way that worked was that, well, we would compare ourselves to everybody else and we'd see, what's my niche? What can I do to contribute the most, to be the best at? And so let's say you're a way better hunter than I am, and every time you and I go out, you come home with a giraffe and I come home with a rabbit. And so I just can't compete with you on that domain. Fun. It's a bummer, but that's the way it goes. But maybe I'm a better arrow maker than you are. Or maybe I can, and so now you need me because you want me to help you make those arrows to bring down the giraffe. Or maybe I tell stories better than you do. Or maybe there's just something out there that I can do better. Because probabilistically speaking, in our hunter-gatherer groups, there was only 30 of us. And so I've got a decent shot at being a better hunter than I am, but I make arrows better than he does, and so I'm still a value to the group, and hopefully someone in the group will choose me and want to be my partner, my romantic partner. So the problem in the modern world is that I can't be the best at anything. all I got to do is log onto Facebook, and I can immediately see that everybody's better than I am at everything. And so maybe one of the ways that we could do this is by hiving off and creating smaller sub-environments. And if you could do that, creating these, a negative term for them is cliques, but if you could do that in a way that allows people to socialize in these sort of smallish groups like we're in today, this is a perfect size hunter-gatherer group, right? And then you could sort of find your place in that niche, you could join it on a regular basis, and you would feel much more positively about yourself because you think, well, in this group, here's how I stand out, here's what my positive quality is. And it doesn't even need to be the same in every group. All it needs to do is be, this is what makes me special in this context. And if social media could find a way to do that naturally, I think that would be a plus.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Sure.
So that was our last question. Thank you so much, Bill, for coming and speaking with us today. I know that it's early for you. Do you have any final remarks, any words of, I guess, optimism towards the future of socializing virtually?
Well, my word of optimism would be a platform just like this one. This is what's so great about human nature. We're infinitely innovative. And when suddenly the pandemic pushes us into a situation where we have to socialize electronically and we're all in squares on a screen, then people like Ethan and you come along and the rest of the gang pull on everybody and you design this new wonderful thing that allows people to do it that much easier. So my words of optimism would be exactly what we're seeing here.
Well, thank you. That's really kind. And we really wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. You've advised us so much on how to make people feel good when they're on Toucan. So I just thank you for everything. Thank you for being here today. And everyone, please just take this opportunity to mingle. If you can stay for a little bit, everybody's here because they're interested in social psychology and socializing online. So chances are you can find somebody here who you mesh really well with. So thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you all again soon on Toucan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm going to be embarrassed to admit I have to run. I have to shower and get myself to work because it's morning here.
Of
but
course.
It is awesome to see you all, and I would love to chat, and I'd love to come back another time.
Thank you, Bill. See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.